Welcome to the historynetwork.org podcast. This podcast is brought to you by lynda.com, and there's news of a great offer from them coming up later in the show, as well as a look forward to episode 8. The historynetwork.org podcast, season 8, episode 7, Gas Warfare in World War I. Gas was one of the most feared weapons of World War I. Proportionately, though, there were few casualties from gas throughout the war. The British kept accurate figures from 1916. Of those casualties, only 3% were fatal and 70% would be back on the front line in weeks. Gas was more the bogeyman. It was not a bullet to be dodged or something you could hide from. Initially, protection was rudimentary, from a cotton pad covered in urine to a chemically infused bag to place over your head with plastic eye slits. The idea of using gas as a weapon predates the First World War. Indeed, the Hague Convention of 1899 outlawed the use of projectiles whose sole purpose was the diffusion of asphyxiating or deleterious gases. With the exception of the United States, all the major powers signed the agreement. Yet, within the first month of the war, the French had fired tear gas grenades, and by the end of 1914, the Germans had used shrapnel shells coated with an irritant, to little effect, it has to be said. The press was rife with reports of chemical weapons being developed by either side. A French chemist, Monsieur Turpin, was reported to be developing turpinite, which could cause injury to a man without making any obvious visible external wound. The Times of London would later show a row of lifeless German bodies reputedly killed by the poison, though there is no proof that these soldiers had died from poisonous chemicals. As early as October 1914, the German Minister of War, General Erich von Falkenhayn, ordered tests to be carried out looking into the use of chemical weapons. It was the remarkable chemist Fritz Haber who would lead the German team. Before the war, Haber had revolutionized agriculture by developing, with Carl Bosch, a method to synthesize ammonia from which fertilizer could be made. Today, over half the world's foodstuffs is produced using nitrogen fertilizer made from the Haber-Bosch process. It was something that won him the Nobel Prize in 1918. Haber was no soldier, but he was fiercely patriotic and could help his country on the industrial front. He suggested the battlefield could be transformed by the clouds of chlorine gas. It even might be so effective it could even shorten the war. The idea was given the green light. In April 1915, he travelled to the Ypres area to be on hand when his new weapon was tried in quantity. Chlorine irritates the eyes, nose, throat and lungs. With prolonged exposure and in high quantities, it is fatal through asphyxiation. At Ypres, the Germans had stockpiled 168 tons. On the 22nd, at 17:30 hours, the taps were turned on gas cylinders placed along the front line. A slight breeze blew the yellow-green cloud toward the French trenches. Sentries believed it to be a smokescreen to cover German movements. Men were ordered to stand to. Within seconds, the French and Algerians in the forward trenches were choking. Panic ensued as thousands of men scrambled back from the front. A 4-mile gap was created in the Allied lines. One British soldier described the scene. I watched figures running wildly in confusion over the fields. Greenish-grey clouds swept down upon them, turning yellow as they travelled over the country, blasting everything they touched and shrivelling up the vegetation. Then there staggered into our midst French soldiers, blinded, coughing, chests heaving, faces an ugly purple colour, lips speechless with agony. and behind them in the gas-soaked trenches we learnt that they had left hundreds of dead and dying comrades. This slow-moving wall of gas within minutes had left 1,000 French and Algerian troops dead and another 4,000 wounded. The success exceeded all expectations, but the Germans failed to fully exploit the breakthrough. Troops were nervous to advance and not in great enough number. The advance was checked. The worldwide outcry was immediate. Sir John French, Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, wrote heatedly of the German attacks at Ypres. All the scientific resources of Germany have apparently been brought into play to produce a gas of so virulent and poisonous a nature that any human being brought into contact with it is first paralysed and then meets with a lingering and agonising death. For all the consternation, it did not stop the British and French hurriedly starting gas production of their own. The British commander of 2nd Corps, Lieutenant General Sir Charles Ferguson, said of gas, "It is a cowardly form of warfare which does not commend itself to me or other English soldiers. We cannot win this war unless we kill or incapacitate more of our enemies than they do of us, and if this can only be done by our copying the enemy in his choice of weapons, we must not refuse to do so." September 1915 saw the first British use at Loos. Newly formed gas companies, after waiting for a favourable wind, pumped 140 tons of gas onto the battlefield from over 5,000 cylinders deployed along the front lines. Unfortunately, on part of the front line, the wind changed, blowing back onto British infantry waiting to put in the attack, causing 2,000 casualties with 7 fatalities. The situation was exacerbated when German shelling made a direct hit on unused cylinders. It has been argued that more British gas casualties were suffered that morning than German. Deploying gas in this manner was fickle. Both the French and Germans suffered mishaps in 1915. Another mode of delivery was needed. The obvious answer was to use artillery. This would both increase range and allow a greater variety of gas to be released. Harbour was married to the gifted chemist Clara Immerwahr. She was the first woman to be awarded a PhD from the University of Breslau. So appalled by the gas attack at Ypres and her husband's involvement was she, that a few days after the attack she took her husband's service revolver and shot herself. Incredibly, Harbour pressed on. Buoyed by success at Ypres, Phosgene was developed. Colourless, its odour resembled freshly cut hay or grass. Whilst chlorine caused coughing, which limited how much gas was inhaled, Phosgene caused much less coughing. This resulted in more being inhaled. It was consequently adopted by both German and Allied armies. Phosgene had a delayed effect. Apparently healthy soldiers were taken down with Phosgene gas poisoning up to 48 hours after inhalation. Once poisoned, there was very little that could be done. Though never as notorious in public consciousness as what was to come next, Phosgene killed far more people. About 85% of the 100,000 deaths caused by chemical weapons during World War I were from Phosgene. Mustard gas is the most well-known and notorious of the gas used during World War I. German scientists again led the field in development. By now the nature of the war had changed. It was very much a slugging match. In April of 1917 the United States had joined the Allies. They would now have numerical superiority. The Germans needed something to assist in a defensive role. Harbour was aware of the tests on mustard gas. Through his connections with the High Command, he suggested mustard gas might have potential. Colourless, almost odourless, it's an irritant which causes chemical burns on contact with the skin. The blisters develop only after exposure, so once they start to come, it's too late. The effectiveness of mustard gas was due to its debilitating effects rather than its killing power. Another important feature of it was that it would remain dangerous for long after the shell had deployed it. and a little went a long way. One drop of the chemical weapon could cause skin burns on people within 10 cubic metres. The nurse Vera Britton wrote of soldiers affected by mustard gas. "I wish those people who talk about going on with this war whatever it costs could see the soldiers suffering from mustard gas poisoning. Great mustard-coloured blisters, blind eyes, all sticky and stuck together, always fighting for breath, with voices a mere whisper, saying that their throats are closing and that they know they will choke." It would cause internal and external bleeding and attacked the bronchial tubes, stripping off the mucous membrane. It was extremely painful. Many soldiers had to be strapped to their beds. After extreme exposure, it would take a person 4 or 5 weeks to die of mustard gas poisoning. Chief Nurse Lily B. Crichton described how they treated those affected by mustard gas. "The men would come in with hideous blisters, extending from their shoulder down the length of their bodies. The nurses would clip away all this blistered skin, clean the raw surface with antiseptic solution, dry it with an electric blower and spray on the amberine. Burns treated in this way healed in an incredibly short time." Unlike chlorine and phosgene, where victims received oxygen followed by bed rest until they were returned to health, mustard gas needed to be washed off within 30 minutes of exposure to prevent the blistering doing its worst. So mobile shower units with trained medics were deployed. Once showered, troops would be issued with new uniforms, their old ones being sent for decontamination before being reissued. Toward the end of the war, where mustard gas was used in ever-increasing amounts, it became more and more difficult to deal with the large numbers of casualties. It was to become the most effective chemical agent used during the First World War, owing not to the numbers which it killed, but to the temporary effects of skin blistering and severe conjunctivitis, and its ability to render ground uninhabitable owing to the time which it took to evaporate. Not only that, being heavier than air or water, it would settle in ditches or at the bottom of trenches and puddles, creating a persistent environmental hazard for troops, civilians and animals alike. All a soldier needed to do was disturb the dirt, mud or water, and he would suffer from gas exposure. Early defence against gas was rudimentary. After Ypres in 1915, 100,000 cotton wads were made available, dipped in bicarbonate of soda. They were to be held over the face. In the case of extreme emergency, a urine-soaked cloth could give some solace against chlorine. The hypo helmet was the next development, a cloth bag soaked in hypo solution with a celluloid window to see through. The only filtration was the wearer breathing air through the bag, which would filter the chlorine out. Within months, 2.5 million had been manufactured. Cumbersome to put on, easily damaged and uncomfortable, they were not popular, which limited their efficiency, but they were better than nothing. As new gas technology was developed, defensive countermeasures needed to be found. The hypo helmet proved useless against Phosgene and was quickly updated with another gas-permeable hood worn over the head. Both these were replaced in 1916 with the small box respirator, a small box filled with chemical filters connected to a pipe which the wearer held to their mouth to breathe through. Initially, a nose clip would be worn, but this was replaced with a full head hood. Gas was held in such fear that during the British reversals of fortune with the German Spring Offensive of 1918, it was found that while some troops had discarded their rifles, hardly any had left behind their respirators. Though effective against breathing in gas, the respirator did little to prevent the chemical burns of mustard gas. Soldiers were issued with a cape, sometimes referred to as a gas cape. These could be donned during a gas attack in the hope that the mustard gas would settle on the cape rather than infuse the wool uniform they were issued with. Perhaps apocryphal, some Scottish regiments took to wearing ladies' tights with their kilts as a defence against mustard gas. Like rifle drill, Gas drill became part of a soldier's regular routine. At the clanging of a bell or toot of a whistle, troops would be expected to don their protective gear speedily in all conditions. Soldiers were ordered to have masks to hand at all times. One British officer described the claustrophobic conditions of wearing one. "We gaze at one another like goggle-eyed, imbecile frogs. The mask makes you feel only half a man. The air you breathe has been filtered of all save a few chemical substances. A man doesn't live on what passes through the filter, he merely exists. He gets the mentality of a wide-awake vegetable." The fear of gas became viral, psychological. Soldiers were permanently on edge for fear of it, adding to the stress caused by frontline duty. One soldier described the atmosphere in the front line. With men trained to believe that a light sniff of gas might mean death, and with nerves highly strung by being shelled for long periods, and with the presence of not a few who really had been gassed, it is no wonder that the gas alarm went beyond all bounds. Gas horns would be honked, empty brass shell casings beaten, rifles emptied, and the mad cry would be taken up. For miles around, scared soldiers woke up in the midst of frightful pandemonium and put on their masks, only to hear a few minutes later the cry of "All safe!" 2 or 3 alarms a night were common. Gas shock was as frequent as shell shock. At the outbreak of war, Germany was the world's leading chemical manufacturer, with the other nations playing catch-up. It's estimated over 120,000 tons of gas were produced. It's worth noting casualties of these noxious chemicals were not limited to the front. Factory workers also fell victim. Germany had the best safety record, yet at the Bayer plant in Höchst, men were frequently poisoned by gas. As many as 1/3 could be absent from the factory at any given time due to gas-related illnesses. In Britain and France the situation was worse, with smaller plants hastily brought into action. Running repairs to pipe work, cleaning pipes, transporting barrels of toxins, all led to injuries similar to those of soldiers fighting. High absenteeism led to a rotational schedule that allowed workers to have a week off for every 20 days in the plant. It's hardly any wonder that after the war in 1925, the Geneva Protocol for the prohibition of the use in war of asphyxiating, poisonous or other gases and of bacteriological methods of warfare was signed by all the major powers. The experiences of gas in the First World War created enough fear for most of the belligerents during World War II to prepare for its use but not deploy it. The exception was Japan, where it was used against the Chinese. As to Fritz Haber, who pioneered its use with patriotic fervour, it's ironic that in 1933 he was refused entry to his own laboratory in Berlin. He had fallen foul of the new racial laws. All Jews had been dismissed. He emigrated to Britain. It seems fitting to finish with an excerpt from Wilfred Owen's poem Dulce et decorum est. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. Now, in a moment, a look ahead to episode 8, which is a fascinating perspective on how the Red Cross managed to get parcels from the furthest corners of the globe to POWs. But first, let me tell you about our amazing offer from lynda.com. That's lynda.com. If you don't know Lynda, then they are the place to go if you want to learn something new, whether that be learning how to use a piece of software, or whether you want guidance on how to speak in public or negotiate a salary rise. It's really amazing the diversity of subjects that you can find on lynda.com. And by using the link lynda.com/historynet, you can get completely free and full access to every single one of their tutorials for 10 days. You've got nothing to lose and perhaps a lot to gain. Maybe you'll even find a new vocation you never knew you had. Lynda.com is used by millions of people around the world and has over 3,000 courses on topics like web development, photography, visual design and business, as well as software training like Excel, WordPress and Photoshop. All of their courses are taught by experts and new courses are added on the site every week. Whether you want to set new financial goals, find a work-life balance, invest in a new hobby, ask your boss for a raise, find a new job or improve upon your current job skills in 2015, Lynda.com has something for everyone. So here's all you need to do. Sign up for your free 10-day trial today by visiting lynda.com/historynet and you will get unlimited access to every course on lynda.com, access to view tutorials on tablets and iPhone plus Android mobile devices, and access to any new courses added every week. Angus and I have used lynda.com over the years as we've developed the History Network and expanded it to produce the Ancient Warfare magazine podcast. We've also used it in our day job lives as well. As you'll probably know already, the History Network is a spare time operation for Angus and myself. And the beauty is that it's always easy to find what you're looking for, and the content is always there and available if you need to refer to it once in a while or again and again. So go on, invest in yourself and sign up for a free 10-day trial to lynda.com by visiting lynda.com/historynet. We challenge you to learn something new in 2015. So, on to episode 8. In a couple of weeks we have got an absolutely fascinating look into the Red Cross parcel service during World War II. The episode is called Parcels from Home, the story of Red Cross parcels in World War II, and has been written by New Zealand historian and tech writer Mark Webster. Mark recently completed a history of the subject, and his Parcels from Home books will be published in 2015 on Apple's iBooks platform. A student version by Steve Bolton, Parcels from Home, plus a historian's compendium version with more detail and a chapter on prisoners of the Japanese. So do join us in a couple of weeks for that. It really is one not to miss. Now, just as Mark and others have done, do you want to write a script on a topic we've not covered? Why not drop us a line? Some of our most popular episodes have been written by listeners. There are other ways you can support us and get involved. There is the donate button at the website, thehistorynetwork.org. You can also find our past seasons there, which are chaptered files for download, and each of them has a running time of between around 2 and 5 hours, depending on the season, and you'll pay just £2 for each of these. You can get involved on the social side as well. Search for The History Network on Facebook and like our page. Follow us on Twitter. We are at History Network on there. Go to youtube.com/user/The History Network and take a look at our YouTube channel. There's lots of content there, including the video podcast we produce for Ancient Warfare magazine. And if you'd like to let us know what you think, give us some ideas about podcast subjects you'd like to see come up, or want to bring us up on an error or point of contention, then whatever it is, it's info@the History Network for that. We would love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Angus Wallace, read by Nick Barker.